Have you ever seen a pope interrupt the Angelus to cry for children he never knew on the morning of July 7, 2025? While thousands of faithful gathered in St. Peter's Square awaiting the traditional blessing, Pope Leo XIV did something no one expected. He didn't speak about politics. He didn't comment on church reforms. He simply paused, looked at the crowd, took a deep breath, and then he said something that silenced even the bells of St. Peter's Basilica. I would like to express my sincere condolences to all the families who have lost loved ones, particularly their daughters who were at a summer camp during the disaster caused by the flooding of the Guadalupe River in Texas, United States. We pray for them. The moment was brief, but the impact was global. Amid the marble columns of the Vatican, the Pope stood, but something had changed. It wasn't the tone. It wasn't the liturgy. It was the silence. A silence that said more than words. The faithful noticed it. So did the photographers. What was supposed to be just another Angelus became, before millions, an intimate and unexpected moment of mourning. And then came the voice, slow, wounded, prayerful. I would like to express my sincere condolences to all the families who have lost loved ones, particularly their daughters who were at a summer camp during the disaster caused by the flooding of the Guadalupe River in Texas, the United States. We pray for them. For a few seconds, no one reacted. It was as if the Pope had torn through the veil of ceremony and spoken directly, not as a head of state, but as a father who saw the suffering and had no choice but to bow before it. The Texas tragedy had already made the news in the last 48 hours, but coverage was fast, cold, statistical, flash flood, camps swept away, victims still unconfirmed. Words that inform but don't touch. What Leo XIV did was the opposite. He gave the tragedy a soul. He named the pain. He located the suffering, and he turned it in front of the entire world into a prayer. The Guadalupe River, which winds through the calm landscapes of South Texas, had never made international headlines. Until now. The sudden flooding, caused by intense rainfall and the emergency release of a dam, caught hundreds off guard, including dozens of young girls at a religious summer camp. Tents were swallowed in minutes. Cabins turned to rubble. Parents, who just hours earlier had received joyful photos on their phones, were later contacted by National Guard helicopters. And that's why the Pope's gesture resonated so deeply. It wasn't just a pastoral mention. It was a public acknowledgement of invisible pain, the kind that, if not named by a voice of spiritual authority, tends to disappear in the relentless waves of the news cycle today. Leo XIV did the opposite. He anchored the memory, and by doing so, he touched the very core of the Christian faith. The belief that no tear is too small to be heard by heaven. There are moments when heaven feels far away, and there are others, rare ones, when heaven leans down. That's what happened at the Vatican, when Leo XIV interrupted the liturgy not to teach doctrine, but to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. And more than that, to say that this weight had names, ages, and tears. The words spoken from the papal balcony crossed continents, but landed exactly where the wound still bled, in the homes of Texas families still waiting for news, for answers. And even without knowing them, the Pope spoke as if he was sitting in their living rooms. He didn't mention statistics. He mentioned daughters. He didn't speak of numbers. He spoke of a camp. Pain, when described with detail, ceases to be abstract. It becomes unbearably real. In the Diocese of San Antonio, priests interrupted masses to repeat the Pope's words in English. In Latino communities across Texas, some cried upon hearing a European pontiff speak the name Guadalupe River, a gesture that transformed a local tragedy into a universal grief. For a few sacred seconds, Rome felt closer to Houston than to Paris, but Leo XIV's gesture carried something deeper still. He didn't speak as a distant authority. He spoke as someone kneeling before another's suffering, and that changes everything since ascending to the throne of Peter. This Pope has been described as enigmatic, reserved, even severe, but there before the world's cameras, he revealed a different face, that of a shepherd who knows that prayer doesn't fix everything, but refuses to let the grieving pray alone. That choice has weight. In an age where tragedies become hashtags and condolences turn robotic, the Pope did the opposite. He paused. He felt, and he wept, not with tears, but with words that knew exactly where to land. That's why so many stood in silence afterward, because suddenly, the tragedy had found shelter, and more than that, it had been lifted into the sacred. There is no more cruel silence than that which settles after a natural disaster. Sirens stop. The news moves on. The media chases the next story. But for the parents who bury their daughters, time stands still. And in that void between grief and forgetfulness, the Pope made a decisive move. His condolence was just the beginning. Behind the scenes at the Vatican, as the media replayed his words, a silent pastoral action was already underway. In U.S. archdioceses, direct orders flowed in. Send resources, psychological support, chaplains. This was more than was an emergency pastoral response. As if the church was saying, if these girls were swept away by the floodwaters, we'll reach them with boats, with prayers, with presence. In Rome, a private mass was held in the Pope's chapel, lit only by candles and a single vase of water from the Tiber on the altar. The names of the Guadalupe River victims were handwritten. No reporters, no audience, just an altar, the Pope's ring left empty, and a silent wooden cross. A photo taken by an aide went viral within minutes, captioned, "One candle per soul, one Our Father per tear," but beneath it all lay something far more profound. The Pope's message was not mere lament, it was theological. In an era when tragedies are often labeled natural disasters, Leo XIV reminded the world that some pains go beyond meteorology. Some wounds ask of us, who are we before the death of innocence? When children die at summer camp, more than life is lost. Trust in the world, security in the future, the peace of youth, a piece of humanity goes with them. That's why the Pope didn't speak of floods, he spoke of daughters, because a river may carry bodies away, but it's forgetting that drowned souls. In the US, priests began reporting something unusual: spontaneous confessions from young people who, moved by the Pope's words, felt compelled to return to the church not out of fear, but out of compassion, as if that shared pain had awakened a silent longing for meaning. Ultimately, the question that hangs in the air is always the same: what if it had been my daughter? In the following days, crosses began to be stuck into the banks of the Guadalupe River. Some bore names. Others held a single flower. On many, a phrase in English became the symbol of that moment. She was seen. The church didn't bring back those girls, but in that moment it proved it could do something greater than raise bodies. It could revive the world's gaze. It turned a local tragedy into a global reflection and reminded humanity that a mother's grief in Texas is also sacred in Peter's church. That is why this video is not just news, it is a call. When tragedy strikes the world, it spreads like a wildfire. But when it touches the soul, it seeps like water, quiet, cold, devastating. The Guadalupe River flood was not merely a weather event. For many, it was the kind of event that redefines faith. Because when the world sinks, the question isn't where was God, but who had the courage to remain standing. The morning after the Pope's words, in San Antonio Cathedral, something remarkable happened. A group of young people, many of whom had never stepped into a church, knelt at the altar without waiting for a priest. Some held signs bearing the names of the girls. Others held candles. No one organized it, no one led it. It was as if the silence left by the disaster became an invisible cry that only reverence could answer. Meanwhile, on social media, a spiritual movement began to form, not with political slogans, not with polarizing messages, but with prayer. Thousands, Catholic or not, began sharing a single request: that this pain not die in vain, that these girls' deaths might spark an unseen transformation. That's when the Pope's phrase appeared on murals, t-shirts, church notice boards, and obits. They were seen. The words were not just beautiful, they were radically Christian. Because, in a world where tragedies are disposable, only one thing is more violent than pain, and that is forgetting. Leo XIV understood that. He didn't use grand proclamations. He didn't call for global forums. He simply did what a true pastor does. He paused, he looked, and within that look lay more theology than many treatises. But the Pope's message also carried symbolic weight, the reminder that the water which kills is the same that baptizes. The same element that claimed those lives in Texas is the source of cleansing at the altar. Perhaps that's why, in many places, priests chose to delay Mass that day. They celebrated baptisms instead as acts of rescue, as if to say, the flood didn't win, life still reigns. In Rome, the Pope ordered the baptismal font of St. Peter's Basilica to remain open for 24 hours. Any pilgrim could approach, touch the water, and pray for the victims. That night, in the rain, a Texan man who had lost his niece came and left a photo of her on the marble. He touched the water and murmured, "This water didn't take her, it will carry her." That sign, captured by a security guard and never broadcast, spread quietly through Catholic circles worldwide. And, spontaneously, the Guadalupe River began to be called among the faithful the river of the white martyrdom, not because of violence but because of innocence. These girls didn't die because of war, hatred, or persecution. They died while playing, sleeping, dreaming. And that purity is, in church tradition, the deepest form of white martyrdom, when someone offers life without even knowing it. Vatican theologians quietly began discussing establishing a liturgical remembrance for children who die in environmental tragedies. The proposal isn't formal yet, but the precedent is there. For the first time, a natural disaster is being considered a global spiritual milestone for the contemporary church. All this because the Pope spoke, but more than that, because the Pope listened. Leo XIV is not known for flaming speeches. He lacks media charisma, but he has something rare: discernment. He knows when the world demands answers, and when it only needs presence. That morning, in the face of us mourning, he didn't offer solutions, he offered tears. And in God's kingdom, that's still the highest form of leadership. Now, as the Guadalupe waters recede and families attempt to rebuild what remains, one certainty stands: those girls were not forgotten. They were remembered, wept for, honored, and above all they were seen by a man in white who, for a few minutes, didn't speak as the Pope. He spoke as a father. On Sunday afternoon, church bells rang simultaneously across both hemispheres. in San Antonio, Texas, and in Rome, at the heart of the Vatican. A simple gesture, yet profoundly liturgical, as if the sacred bronze were proclaiming to the world, "We are still here, we still hear, we still weep." Pope Leo XIV did not speak again after his brief statement about the girls, but he didn't need to. His silence became eloquent, because there are moments when the silence of the shepherd speaks louder than the sermon. It was as if he was saying, "Morning is still present. I will not interrupt it with words." And it was precisely that choice not to fill the emptiness with noise that sparked something unprecedented. Families affected by the tragedy began sending letters to the Vatican, not asking for explanations, but offering thanks for being seen, for not being left alone in a moment when so many had already moved on. One of those letters, written by a mother from Texas, read, "Your Holiness, my daughter died in that river, and no theology will bring her back. But when I heard your words, I felt that, for the first time, someone didn't try to explain God. They simply chose to embrace us." That letter was read during a private meeting between the Pope and leaders of the Curia. After the reading, Leo XIV reportedly remained silent for several minutes, eyes fixed on the crucifix, and, according to accounts from within the Vatican, he only whispered one phrase, "When we weep together, that is when the Church begins again." That phrase, not officially released to the public, has quietly circulated among seminarians, religious, and bishops, not as an official statement, but as a breath, a new way of understanding the Church's mission in today's world. Less concerned with explaining, more concerned with being present, and perhaps that is why this episode will be remembered as a turning point, both literally and spiritually. Because when a river swallows daughters and a city falls silent, the world calls it tragedy. But when a pope looks upon that same river, calls out the names of the lost daughters, and transforms mourning into presence, the world calls it church. And now, we need to speak to you. If you've made it this far, you know this video is not just about ecclesiastical politics. It's not just about geography or floods. It's about something the world tries to bury: everyday compassion. So before you go, we ask for something simple but powerful. Share this video, not for us, but for every name the world has already forgotten. And if this story moved you in any way, subscribe to this channel, because here, every tear has an echo, and every silence has a story that deserves to be told.